Many of the schemes that today governments undertake, all in good intention, many of the measures that are taken up by private sector, all in good intention, we know cannot touch everyone everywhere. There are people who are getting left behind. WaterAid is essentially an international not-for-profit organization. It works in the space of water and sanitation. In India, it is registered as Jal Seva Charitable Foundation, and I think it was started in 1986. Now we are present almost in 13 states, about 35 plus districts, and about 6 cities. And our bread and butter work is essentially providing rural water sanitation and water supply services. And this we do in a way that which is not like how the private sector would deliver, or which is on a cost basis, or where government would deliver, which is on a welfare basis, right? Now, this is something that we are trying to, in some sense, hybridize, largely through philanthropy and charity work. But what we want to do is ensure that this is sustainable, and for it to be sustainable, for the work we do to be sustainable, we really want to go deeper into how we can create processes where the community is able to take ownership and sustain what some of the others can do, including WaterAid does for them. And this is really what sort of separates us from any other organization. So WaterAid is actually part of a global federation. That's something I forgot to mention. We have 7 global members. WaterAid India is an associate member to this global federation. We have several country programs which are managed by these global federation members across the world. And our joint mission of the entire WaterAid global community is to reach everyone everywhere by 2030. And why 2030? Of course, it aligns with the sustainable development goals that we are thinking of. And the way we work, we want to facilitate this process and help everyone reach that 2030 goal collectively. And that's why it's everyone everywhere by 2030. And everyone everywhere is also important because many of the schemes that today governments undertake, all in good intention, many of the measures that are taken up by private sector, all in good intention, we know cannot touch everyone everywhere. There are people who are getting left behind. And a large part of WaterAid work is to try and map these people and ensure that these people also have the benefit of those services. So this is something that I already mentioned. We're international not-for-profit. In India, we are registered as Jal Seva Charitable Foundation. So we are a pure play Indian entity now, like every other not-for-profit in India. We raise resources both internationally and through domestic resources. And this is our sort of overall footprint in India. I work out of Hyderabad, and here we look after 2 states, Andhra and Telangana, the Telugu states, Deccan region, so to speak. And a bulk of my experience is going to come from managing some of our programs here in these 2 states, and also in a couple of other states, Kerala and Karnataka, which we are part of. Now, of course, Karnataka has a separate state office. I briefly put up some numbers here just to let you know that this is the kind of reach that we constantly endeavor to achieve. People with access to toilets, people with access to clean drinking water, people with access to hygiene education and hygiene awareness. And this is also a slide to mention that we are fairly serious about the way we track our outcomes. And when we say no one is left behind, this is really how we track them, and we ensure that the outcomes are really quantifiable and the beneficiaries actually get every rupee, rather than it being spent on multiple other reasons. So we also, while we are working, we know that others also would like to contribute. So we adopt a strategy of leveraging, primarily through government resources, government schemes, and also helping CSR target their investments, so that it can be a collaborative effort where private sector, civil society such as WaterAid, and government can come together in a sort of tripartite collaboration, and deliver these initiatives at scale. So I'll just take a little bit to talk about our thematic areas. So we have 4 specific thematic areas: safe, assured drinking water at the household. And like I mentioned, our endeavor is to try and sort of mimic what happens in urban India in some sense, the good ones, of course, not all the bad stuff, that every household has a tap. We have a tap connection at our homes, and we often get water whenever we want. So that assured drinking water of, say, the minimum of 55 liters per day per capita is something that is assured to every citizen. Safe, because we know there are several water quality challenges, which I'll talk about briefly in the next couple of slides. So safe, assured drinking water at household level is what we endeavor to do. And that's a very big focus for us. And in those areas where we are fixing issues around water, and we are ensuring that apart from drinking water, there is water available for domestic purposes, we also address the issue of sanitation. And when I say we address the issue of sanitation, what we are essentially trying to do is letting people understand the need for sanitation, helping them change behaviors so they themselves build their own toilets. And then there is a sustainable change in the way that sanitation comes about. Thirdly, we have hygiene, and we feel it is an important component of the entire WASH package. It's a very cross-cutting theme. Hygiene is very critical to break the infection chain. We endeavor to ensure that many of our programs have hygiene embedded in it. It could be a pure play water program where we are looking at, say, groundwater recharge measures, but we will look at introducing hygiene into that component, simply because we know that water that will then be provided needs to be handled safely and in a hygienic manner. And even messaging around safe handling of water is important to ensure that the water supplied is actually safe. So, and finally, we have WASH in institutions. By institutions, we refer to 3 specific types of public institutions, which is healthcare facilities, Anganwadi centers, and schools. And we know that these 3 institutions are really the pillars of any functioning society, particularly rural societies. And if these institutions do not have WASH services, they in turn will not be able to provide that kind of support to the societies that they're catering to. So these are our 4 thematic areas, and bulk of our work rotates around our packages and programs are designed around these particular 4 thematic areas. Okay, so what's our approach, and what perhaps differentiates us from some of the other organizations that are working in this space? Well, there could be several overlaps. I'm not saying we are the only ones doing this, but we have a specific approach, and we feel that this definitely has worked for us over the last 3 decades, right? So the first very significant approach that we take is that we specifically work with those people who have been left out of the mainstream. So people who are highly vulnerable to water shocks, environmental shocks, people who are highly marginalized. They are nomadic. They are not part of the mainstream habitation. They are, for some reason, we come across this term. They are SC/ST community, or they are the Nayak community, and they are often kept out of the main habitation. And some of these communities don't have, they might have a water source, but they will not have enough infrastructure to take it to their household, right? So these excluded and marginalized communities are one of our first target groups. Of course, this is not to say that we don't work in, say, urban areas. We do work in urban slums. We also work in some towns, some urban centers. in district headquarters and so on. But our prime focus is to ensure that these communities, excluded and marginalized communities, are served first. And then a second key approach that we take is to look at mandated institutions. Now, these mandated institutions are nothing but institutions that are set up through our 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, where the entire process of self-governance is decentralized and institutions are created at the grassroots level for communities to self-govern themselves. And we have a bunch of such structures in the WASH space. We have what are called village water and sanitation committees, which are very specific to address village water and sanitation issues. They are represented by several key stakeholders in the community, and they are able to decide for themselves what is important. And there are ways in which government works with these institutions in order to provide what is needed on water and sanitation. The third thing we do is technical support. This is again for state governments and district administration, where some of our work is actually showcased to them in the form of not necessarily technological, but technical, so to speak, where we are able to share some designs of our work, we are able to share some approaches, etc. And this is something that will help us scale our work at the district and the state level. And additionally, some part of our work also, it's not stated very obviously, but inherently and implicitly, a large part of our work actually focuses on women and youth. And I'll talk about that towards the last slide when we talk about building social capital. Right. So now, if you look at the scenario of water in India, you will. This is not statistics that are that you may not have seen. We've just consolidated different kinds of information, and we're providing this summary statistics here. So we know that 45% of rural households, having exclusive access to improved principal source of drinking water are located in their premises. This is 45%, right? 18% of rural households have pipe water supply in their dwelling, which is actually significant. But if you look at the other side of it, this is not very significant. There is still a fairly large percent of population which are not part of the grid, which do not have access to pipe water supply. Right. So this is one of the significant challenges that we are currently facing in rural India. So of course, in the urban setting too, we have 35% urban households who have individual water supply in their households, which is understandably so, because urban centers are much better serviced than rural areas. But if you look at what happens in terms of how other people within the population segment, say children and elderly and so on, there are many of them don't have access to drinking water. There are 8 million children below the age of 14 in urban India who are at risk, and 5% of world's 20 largest cities under water stress are in India, which is, with Delhi being second on the list. And several of us would have seen these headlines. Durban reaching zero water, Chennai was supposed to reach zero water day, and so on. So these were all, these were real, and we are beginning to perceive these challenges more and more now.